Alright guys, if you have been studying for the 2026 RBT exam, this episode is going to save you time, stress, and probably a few breakdowns. We're breaking down the third edition task list into what actually matters clinically, not just memorizing terms, but understanding how this shows up in real sessions. Understanding the exam structure. 75 score questions, 10 pilot questions. Total of 90 minutes. There's 6 domains. A big takeaway, this test is not memorization, it's application. So remember, that's a huge part of applied behavior analysis is the application part. Behavior acquisition, big chunk, 25%. Behavior reduction and data, those are heavy hitters as well. This is where most people think they're good until they're not. And what you need to know is continuous measurement. That's frequency, duration, latency. So frequency is a count, how many times it happens. Duration is the amount of time that something occurs. And latency is by the time you provide the SD until it happens. So for example, if I say, put away your laundry, how long after I say that until laundry is actually put away? Discontinuous measurement, partial interval. Did it happen at all during the time you were measuring? So if you're measuring, let's just give an example for 15 minutes. Did physical aggression occur at all during the 15 minutes? If yes, you put a check. Yes, partial interval, it did occur. Whole interval occurs the whole time. Another form of discontinuous measurement. Momentary time sampling, did it happen in the moment that you were measuring? So those are discontinuous measurements. Graph reading versus graph making. If you can't answer, what does this tend to mean clinically, then you may not be ready. So here's a clinical example. I'm going to take this part out, take this out, take it out, take it out. All right, clinical frequency increasing is the behavior. So if we're observing behavior on a graph, so if you're looking at a graph, is this behavior increasing or is it decreasing? Is the duration decreasing or increasing? If frequency is increasing, then we could be seeing an increase in problem behavior. Duration increasing means we could be seeing progress, because if duration is decreasing, that means that it's happening less. So maybe you used to have tantrums that would happen, I don't know, like an hour and a half tantrums. I've had kids that have had hour and a half tantrums. So maybe you have a kid that has an hour and a half tantrum, okay? And now it's, an hour, and then it's 30 minutes. So it's decreasing, so that means that you're seeing some progress. But if you see it increasing, then it looks like it is getting worse, right? So it is not the trend that you want to see, is the increase in a behavior. So common mistakes, RBTs collect data, but one of the things is being able to understand the data that you're collecting. So knowing what an increasing trend looks like, increasing going up, decreasing going down, or it could vary. It could be all over the place. It's increasing one and then it's going down for a while and then it's increasing again. So it could be a variable trend as well. So those are some things to look at when you're looking at different graphs, is trying to understand what that means. Do we want to see more time? Do we want to see more of a tantrum behavior, or do we want to see it go down? We want to see it decrease. So, and then also there's a big difference between target or problem behaviors, right? Maladaptive behaviors, and acquisition skills or replacement skills, because those we typically want to see an increase, because whatever it is, we want to see more of. So if we're replacing a skill, so if before they were aggressive, but now we're working on communication, so manding. So we want to see an increase in manding and a decrease in physical aggression. So typically we want to see an increase in those skills and acquisition skills. All right, so about 11% is behavior assessment. So we're looking at some core skills. Preference assessment is one, identifying skill deficits, participating, and just kind of an overview of a functional assessments. So preference assessments, so there's a couple different ones. So there's free operant, means like, hey, like I like this can of Coke. That's a free operant, because like you saw me grab this kind of in my natural environment, I'm taking a drink of it, and you're observing that. So that's a free operant preference assessment. Or you might even see like kids like grab some of their favorite toys or something like that, right? Or like they go to their video games or whatever, Pokemon cards. So you know that because that's what they go to in their environment, you know, or something they talk about all the time. So it's free operant, something that you just see freely in their environment. Free operant is when we use probably more frequently in the settings. And with replacement means it's being replaced. Without replacement means that item is not being replaced. Identifying skill deficits is participating in functional assessments. So you don't have to go into great detail in this part of the section, but what you kind of do as in RBT is you observe, report, right? So you're still observing what is going on, the things that they're doing. And you also want to make sure that your language is observable too. So for example, you wouldn't say, he's mad if he hits you. You could say, aggression occurred following demand, possible escape function. That would be an example. But what you wouldn't say, right, is he's mad or he's, you know, sad or like, you know, he's having a bad day. And if you are going to say that, define what that looks like, right? So we do want to avoid a lot of that language. Those are more mentalistic terms and it's not observable. So we want to make sure that we're being observable. Also, your ABC data collection. So be pretty good with that as far as the antecedent behavior consequence. We base a lot of decisions based on an antecedent consequence on why behavior is occurring, right? So to kind of determine the assumed function. So get pretty good with your ABC data collection too. Behavior acquisition. This is a huge chunk of your test. Okay, so behavior acquisition is about 25% of the RBT exam. This is pretty important. So if you don't understand this, you might struggle with this exam, and then also, you know, just in general, as an RBT, which we don't want to see either. So something you must know, reinforcement, big one. We use reinforcement. We use a term all the time. We use it all the time with, you know, our clients. Reinforcement, first of all, is not bribery. So reinforcement increases the behavior. So more likely that the behavior will occur again. And where a lot of people get hung up on reinforcement is positive and negative reinforcement, assuming that negative reinforcement means something bad, right? So it's because it's negative and we think negative is something bad. But in this instance, that is not the case. So negative reinforcement just means something is kind of taken away in order to increase a behavior. Go over some examples. Punishment decreases a behavior. Reinforcement increases behavior if it's true reinforcement. So positive reinforcement, an example is, I have a can of Coke in front of me. I was gonna say I'm on my computer and I get a can of Coke. I got myself the can of Coke, but let's just say that I'm working on, we'll use manding because I used that earlier. So I'm working on manding and you hand me a can of Coke. Right? And I'm like, Coke, and then you hand it to me. So now I'm being reinforced because I asked for Coke, I get the Coke, right? So it's a tangible reinforcer, right? So something added. Also, a positive reinforcer can be something like social praise. So you can use social praise as a positive reinforcer as well. So that's a big one. So anything that's added. So it could be something tangible, it could be something you say, anything that's more likely to increase that behavior in the future. So if I'm going to be, hey, I really like how you're sitting in your seat. I really like how, you know, whatever it is that you want to see more of, giving that positive praise, adding something, could be a tangible item, could be an activity. So something is added and it's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement. Okay. So let me give you some examples because a lot of people do tend to get this mixed up and it's very common because we think negative, we think something bad. So negative reinforcement. I have a headache and I take Tylenol to get rid of that headache. So it's more likely that I'm going to take Tylenol in the future because it got rid of something that was bothering me. So my head was hurting. I took it, it went away. When I go to the beach, I put sunblock on because it prevents me from getting a sunburn. So absence of sunburn goes away, right? I don't want the sunburn. I know if I wear sunblock, I don't have a sunburn. Another example is if you have, okay, let's just say a homework example. So he's got 20 questions, homework, math problems. He hates math. And you say, okay, you can do 10. We just need to do 10 problems or 5 problems, whatever it might be. Say, okay, we need to do 10 problems. And then, you can take a break or you can, be done, whatever it might be, right? Because it kind of depends on the situation. So you can say, okay, so we're just gonna do 10 questions today. More than likely, they'll start an increase in doing the math work because there's less to do. So there's less math to do, more likely you'll do it because there's less, right? So whatever it is, it helps with that escape maintained behavior often. An alarm clock is also negative reinforcements. Snoozing your alarm clock, because then you don't have to hear it anymore. So it's annoying sound. As soon as you snooze it, you don't have to hear it and listen to it anymore. So that's a big one to know. Positive and negative reinforcement. More likely, I'm going to snooze my alarm clock because I don't have to hear the sound anymore. More likely, I'm going to put sunblock on at the beach. More than likely, I'm going to take Tylenol to get rid of my headache, right? So I want to get rid of something, have less of something. Negative reinforcement. So DTT versus NET. So DTT is discrete trial training, and then NET is natural environmental teaching or natural teaching environment. So DTT is typically what I like to say table time work, even though that's not necessarily true. It doesn't have to be at a table. It's just work that you're more likely to see done at a table. It can be done other places. It can be done on the floor. It can be done, wherever. But oftentimes, you may see something like picture cards are a big one you might see DTT with. So it's discrete trial training. So we're specifically practicing this skill. It's very contrived. I like to just associate it with a lot of table time activities. NET, anywhere in the environment. So it's natural teaching environment. So it just kind of happens naturally. It occurs. So let's say you're tacting discrete trial training. You might be tacting a tree. Like, which one is tree out of an array of 3, right? So you have 3 picture cards. Which one is a tree? Point a tree. And then with NET, you might be like, ooh, what's that? Right? It's a tree. So they tack tree, and that's in the natural environment. So the difference is it can happen anywhere. Like I said, DTT can also happen other places, but more than likely that's something you might see at a table. Prompt and prompt fading. So prompting is very important. This is a big part of your exam as well. Prompting is you can do most to least to most. There's all kinds of different prompts, and it kind of really depends on the individual and the needing for prompt. Typically, a new skill, and this is not always true, you might use most to least prompting because it's a brand new skill being taught. And then for a skill that is not new, more than likely you're using least to most prompting. So depending on the skill, so like for one of the things I want in the exam is like more intrusive prompt versus a less intrusive prompt. So a more intrusive prompt would be physical prompting is a more intrusive prompt. That's like the most, right? Physical prompting. If you're giving a more intrusive verbal prompt, it's probably vocal prompting. Less intrusive, you might use partial physical, gestural, visual, positional. So less intrusive. So they become less and less intrusive because eventually you want them to do things independently. So, and on my other video, we break down some of those skills on the RBT assessment. So there's different prompts. So think of the prompts as a hierarchy. So there's all the way to the top, and then there's all the way to the bottom. Another way I used to work at a clinic a long time ago, I used to think of it as like a ladder, like you're going up or down. Which way are you going? So think about the most restrictive, the most you could do is the most intrusive, and then bring it down. What is going to bring you most to independence? So usually a gestural prompt is pretty low on the hierarchy. A gestural prompt would be much lower than a physical prompt. Prompt fading, so again, those kind of go hand in hand. So you want to try and fade out prompts. You don't want to keep the prompts forever. So the idea isn't like hand over hand forever. Okay, if you're doing hand over hand, do you want to try to fade that out? So maybe you do like hand over hand, then maybe it's a partial physical, right? So full physical, partial physical, gestural, working towards independence. Maybe you have a visual prompt. Okay, so you want to start fading those out, even if you have like just a visual prompt that you use, like even if you use it for like the bathroom, and if you have like a task analysis, you want to eventually break that away. We want to fade that out. We want to work towards independence. Like that's our ultimate goal, is to get as close to independence as possible. So we want to start over time fading out some of those prompts. So the goal is never to keep all of the prompts forever. The goal is to fade out as much as we possibly can. Generalization. We want to generalize these skills. So not only do we want to fade out prompts, we want to generalize the skills that they learn. So it's great. They can do it independently. They can independently go to the bathroom at the clinic 100% of the time. Okay, 100% is pretty high, but we'll go with it. 100% of the time, they are always going to the bathroom. Okay, that might be true. But what about at home? What about at the community if they're at the park? What about at Home Depot? I actually had a client try to use the bathroom at a Home Depot, a display toilet at a Home Depot, because he overgeneralized it. So he definitely got bathroom down, but then we had to discriminate that this is not a usable bathroom. We have to go into the men's bathroom for you to use it. So generalization is where it's being able to do it across settings, across people. So maybe he only goes when mom takes him to the bathroom, not when dad. So we want it to be across people and across settings, across environments. We want to try to generalize it as much as we can so the skill can be replicated in different places and with different people. Token economies. So tokens, we often use those with clients that working on a skill. I find a lot of times we use it when there's difficulty with a task. Maybe it's like some escape maintain behavior. They're having trouble sitting, completing a task, starting a task. So tokens are really great for that. Token board. You can also do a token economy for like anything. So I've actually seen clinics where they have a whole token economy. So they use like dollars, for example, to like earn things, and then they trade it in like at the end of the week or the store. So they are always earning things with those. So token economies are really great. Token boards are great. And then the idea is that they are not a primary reinforcer. It's something you earn, much like money, and it is not something that you get in the natural environment. It is a secondary. So if you have a token, so you're earning a token, eventually that token is traded in for something else that is a potential reinforcer. So whether that's like something from the store, maybe they earn 5 tokens and they get like a preferred activity, maybe they get like time in their iPad. So it's to trade it in for something else, right? So just knowing the system, like how that works for token economies. Chaining and shaping go hand in hand a lot of the times. So chaining is when you break down a task. So I like to think of chaining as like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? So we have like the bread, but like some kind of recipe. So steps, something with steps. So peanut butter jelly sandwich. So we have the bread, we have the peanut butter, we have the jelly, we put it all together. We're making a sandwich. Like the first we get the bread, then we put the peanut butter on, and then we go get the jelly, we put that on, and we put the other piece of bread on. So there's a lot of steps to it, right? Same thing if we make a sandwich. Hand washing is a chaining activity. Toileting is a chaining activity. Taking a shower is a chaining activity. And if you break it down, like you could come up with so many steps depending on the needs of your client. I had a 13 steps for brushing teeth before. So there could be a lot of steps to break down. So those are all chaining. So when you think of it as like steps or like a recipe to like do something, like how many steps does it take to do this activity? Shoe tying can be chaining. Maybe use a visual task analysis to break down the steps as well. There's also different types of chaining. So there's total task chaining, where it's the entire task, the entire thing. So from start to finish. So tying your shoes, like first we put on our shoes, then we get our laces, and then we put them together, and then we make, maybe you do bunny ears, then you tie it, make it through the loop, right? We've tied our shoes. So we're going through all of the steps of shoe tying. Now, if you're doing forward chaining, the client does the very first step. So maybe that's just putting the shoes on, right? And then they're prompted, right? The other steps you're not working towards independence for those. So prompting, like following through those other steps. Okay. Or maybe you're modeling the other steps. Backward chaining, they complete the last step. So you do it, then you do it. And then eventually like work your way back. So like the last part is like that last tie at the end. So, and then maybe you go back another step and it's like, okay, like now putting them together, and then that last tie at the end. So that last step, like backwards to forwards, is backward chaining. Forwards to the end is forward chaining, right? So we start that one step independently, either that first step or that last step independently. And the total task is working towards independence for all of the steps. Shaping is another one. I almost skipped right over it. Shaping is a big one. So we want to shape behavior over time. That's a huge part of what we do as practitioners. So I like to think of it as a couple different ways what shaping means with some examples. So shaping babies, including my baby, just started walking. It's so exciting. About 2 months ago, he took like his first steps. So first he was crawling, and then he started to like kind of like pick himself up and do this and fall back. Pick himself up and fall back. Or like then he started to like hold on to things, and he totally let go, right? And then he started just taking a step and walking and walking. So now he's walking, right? So we had to shape that behavior. So it wasn't just instant, like he went from crawling to walking. There were some other steps in between to shape that behavior for walking. Another example is like swimming. So if a kid is sitting on the steps and then they slowly like start and they'll like doggy paddle, maybe they'll hold onto the rail, and then they're all of a sudden, they start moving their hands and their legs and like slowly shaping to become, a swimmer or a good swimmer. So hand raising P1, so teaching your hand raising, maybe your hand raising is like really low, you're shy, up high, up higher, whole hand. So now we have a whole hand raised. Right? So shaping behavior. So it's like those building blocks over time. And then also with chaining, the reason I say they go hand in hand is because the idea is to use those small steps to shape behavior, right? So we want to, teeth brushing, right? They only have the first step down, but eventually we want to work towards all of the steps to where we can just brush our teeth. So most RBTs, some may over prompt or create prompt dependency, and it's not just RBTs, it's practitioners, it's all of us. We might be guilty of that, over prompting, and also may create like prompt dependency, like where they're totally dependent on our prompts, and then so it's really important to work on that prompt fading as well. So one thing too is that if a client says juice when prompted, for example, I'm just going to give an example of prompting versus independence. If a client says juice when prompted, that is not a mastered skill. That is you were prompted to say that word, right? So it's not work towards independence. Now there are some goals you may find where it does say with prompting, because we're still shaping that behavior, right? We're not to that next step, right? We don't start running when we're still learning to walk. So it's like we may not have all the steps for teeth brushing, so we can't demand that all the teeth brushing steps are done. So sometimes we may still be working on prompting, and we may master out of a prompted goal, but we're not totally mastered out of it. 19% of the exam is on behavior reduction. So there's more emphasis on behavior acquisition than there is on behavior reduction. So this is where people this can be tough sometimes. Just the biggest thing I would say for this is knowing the key concepts. So functions of behavior: escape, attention, tangible, automatic, okay, or sensory. So remember the 4: escape and avoidance, right? That's 1. Attention, tangible, and then which tangible can also be addressed as access. So tangible or access, because it doesn't have to be tangible. It could also be like an activity or something like that too. Automatic or sensory. All right, so interventions. So I'll just go over those real quick. So escape. So an example of escape, if somebody is, so if you're we used that math assignment earlier, right? So if you have a math assignment, and you don't want to do it, right? You don't want to do your homework. So you're like, I'm just going to go to my room and I'm just going to wait. Maybe you elope, right? You're an eloper. You're like, goodbye, check out, running away, I'm checking out. So that could be escape maintained behavior, because you're trying to get out of the thing that you don't want to do. So it's escape maintained. So for example, if mom's on the phone and she's like, yeah, I'm talking to somebody, and then you're like jumping up and down, you're trying to get her attention, and then, you go hit your brother, and then mom goes, hey, stop it, like, I'm not on the phone, right? You now have mom's attention. So that could be an attention-seeking behavior. A tangible or access is something that you want. That may be one way that we observe it, if you're denied the thing that you want. So if I was denied this can of Coke, right, and somebody took this away from me and I punched them in the face, the function of my behavior may be tangible. Interventions. So what do we do about this? I want to be clear, it's an assumed function, and also you can have more than one. Function is not always one. You can have more than one function of our behavior. Interventions: differential reinforcement, DRA, DRO, DRI. So what those mean is DRA is an alternative, differential reinforcement alternative, right? So an alternative replacement skill. So instead of biting my fingers, can bite like a chew. Like I can bite a chew instead, or I can eat a Mentos. That's an alternative to chewing my fingernails. DRO is an other behavior. So anything other, you're getting reinforcement for that. As long as I'm not biting my fingernails, I'm getting some kind of attention, right? Like I could be brushing my hair, I could be writing an essay, I could be watching TV. It's like, hey, great job, I love how you're watching TV. Because what am I not doing? I'm not biting my fingernails. So we're paying attention to any other behavior, right? Another behavior that is not biting my fingernails. So those are some examples of differential reinforcement. DRI is a common one. So that is incompatible behavior. So if my fingers are in my pockets and I'm getting reinforced, like, hey, great job, I love how your hands are in your pockets. Like, put your hands in your pockets. Great job putting your hands in your pockets. I can't bite my fingernail. Well, maybe if I'm very creative, but typically I can't do that if my hands are in my pocket. So it's incompatible because I can't do it because I'm doing something else with my hands. Extinction. So when you were doing something before, so here's an example. So a kid keeps getting out of bed to get a glass of water, gets out of bed every night, gets a glass of water. Mom and dad say, no more water, right? They go into bed. You're putting it on extinction. You're no longer reinforcing that behavior by every time he gets up, he gets to hang out with mom and dad and he gets a glass of water, and now they're like, nope, no more water, go back to bed. What we usually see when we put things on it, this is the science of it, is called an extinction burst. When we put behavior on extinction, we may see an extinction burst, which means the best way that I like to describe this to parents is it gets worse before it gets better, right? There's a big storm coming. So if you put a coin in a Coke machine, right? Or it's way more than a coin. But let's just say, for example, put a quarter in a Coke machine, you don't get your Coke, right? Then you're shaking the Coke, you're kicking the machine, right? You're trying everything to get your Coke and it doesn't happen. You don't get it. You're still not getting your Coke, right? Eventually you walk away. Maybe you go to another soda machine or you find another drink or another way to get a drink, right? But you're no longer focused on this machine, right? Because you've now been put on extinction. You know that putting a coin in this soda machine is not going to give you a soda. So typically we see behaviors increase before they start to decrease when we put things on extinction. Another thing we might see is something called spontaneous recovery, where we don't see a behavior for a while and then it just occurs spontaneously. Boom. Like physical aggression, we haven't seen that in like 3 months. Where did this come from? Okay, that's spontaneous recovery. So we may, if it's a behavior we put on extinction, we may see a recovery of that. Okay, so if you don't know the function, the intervention is kind of just a guessing game, which is not based on behavioral science. So it's very important to know the function of behavior because that helps provide the right interventions. So that's why that ABC data is very helpful in antecedent behavior consequence to know and make an assumption of what behaviors. Also, your observations are very important too, to observe and figure out what's going on. It's like, yeah, I don't know that he likes doing his schoolwork because he runs away and says he has to use the bathroom every 20 minutes, right? It could be a medical thing, but I have seen a lot of clients use the bathroom regularly, or maybe they elope. They run away. Every time I try to get their homework out, they run away. So for example, so here's just kind of the importance of that. You see a kid screaming, you give them attention, their function was attention, congratulations, you were reinforcing the screaming. So we want to avoid that. It's very important that we know the function of the behavior. It's definitely helpful in knowing what we can do, what interventions to use when we know the function. So this is another thing is 13% of the test is on documentation and reporting. So this is where professionalism shows. So what you need to do is write objective notes. So again, go back to that language. Like we want to make sure that our language is very objective. Report changes like sleep, meds, behavior spikes. So that's an important thing to remember for your exam as well as like in session. So any kind of like changes that you want to make sure you report. And who should you communicate with? Your supervisor. That's a big one on the test. So I think that's a go-to. Like, who should I tell? Like, you should definitely tell your supervisor if there's any changes, or if you observe changes, or if like a parent comes to you and says, hey, yeah, like I've just changed their meds, like make sure to tell your supervisor that too. So something wrong that would not be a good observable and objective session note would be client was upset and had a bad day. Correct. Client engaged in 5 instances of aggression following task demands. That would be a much more observable answer, and it tells us exactly what happened. Segment 7, ethics. Ethics is about 15% of your test. It's still a big part of what we do. We want to make sure that we're ethical practitioners. This section can fail you potentially, so just make sure you're up on your ethics. So a big thing is confidentiality, HIPAA. We don't want to violate, if we don't want to tell people like at the park all about our clients' information. We don't tell people that don't know or aren't privy to that information, right? So it should be between the caregiver, your supervisor, anybody on the case directly. It should not go outside of that. So if you don't want to be in violation of that and give out any of those and identifying information about your clients. And also just make sure you're protecting things like that are HIPAA related. Like you don't want to have, like if you have paper data, like you don't want to just have it open. You want to make sure it's locked up, that it's secured. Also boundaries, no dual relationships. So you don't want to have a dual relationship like with your client. You can't be your client's babysitter and their RBT. So that's something to be mindful of. I've had that happen a few times. So we want to make sure that we keep professionalism. And I know too, I just want to say that like areas where this may be difficult is if you're in like a smaller area, if you have, situations where you see the parents or, so I think to the best that we can to be able to protect those boundaries and make sure that we're not having another relationship. So outside of that professionalism, so you as an RBT, that should be your only role in your client's life. There should not be like a dual role. Like I said, you're not going to hang out with mom and go to the movies. You're not gonna, unless you're working at the movies with your client, like because they have trouble in community settings. You're not gonna go to the Christmas party to hang out, right? Unless you're running a session because they have difficulty during, a Christmas party with large gatherings or something like that. But your relationship should be a working relationship, and when you're working as an RBT and not outside of those boundaries. Also, just making sure that we can now accept gifts, which wasn't true when I started as an analyst, under $10. So if there was something small or like handmade or food or something, we can accept those kinds of things or gifts. But, I had a family one time that tried to give me $50 and I'm like, I can't accept this outside of billing and everything like that. And I'm like, I unfortunately, like it's against my ethics code. Like I can't take $50 from you. So as much as I appreciate that the family is grateful for what we do, we just want to make sure that we keep those boundaries. Supervision requirements. So you are required to have 5% of your hours supervised. I always tell my RBTs, like, listen, if you get more than 5%, that's great. But we do want to make sure that you're getting at least 5% of your hours supervised. Social media is a big one. We want to try the best that we can. I know sometimes that you might see somebody like in a Facebook group or something like that, but you're not to be friends with your clients. You also don't want to post pictures of your clients on social media. That's also is a HIPAA violation. So we want to make sure we're mindful of that and just keeping the privacy, keeping the professionalism. That's a big one. Don't violate HIPAA. Don't have multiple boundaries, right? We definitely don't want pictures of our client like posted on our like personal social media page. It'd be different if like if you're at a clinic and they post like a group picture of everybody and everybody has permission to have their picture taken. Totally different scenario than you posting something on your personal page. We definitely want to stay away from that. Posting clients online, just don't do it. Just don't post clients online. Like I've even had like older clients, like just don't like be like, hey, like, let's post pictures. It can get tricky and it's just not a good idea anyways. And are you really keeping professional boundaries? Accepting gifts, like I said, $10, less than $10, small things. You can accept a bottle of water, you can accept food to some degree. We just want to be mindful of that because again, we're trying to keep professionalism. So we want to be mindful of that. So understand concepts. So I just want to reiterate, yes, like there's definitions for you to memorize, but you don't want to just memorize a definition. You want to try to put it into practice in as many scenario questions as you possibly can. So a big focus on reinforcement and punishment, both negative and positive, and negative punishment, right? Reinforcement increases, punishment decreases. Functions of behavior, data interpretation. So the way the graph looks, is this increasing or decreasing? Is this variable? Is this good or bad? What does this look like? What do we want to see more of based on the trend of the data collected? Biggest mistake, setting just like a vocab test, because this is not a vocab test. This is applied. And that's where I found that RBTs, or future RBTs, right, is where a lot of struggle is. Yeah. So I've definitely seen that too. Okay. So I just want to make sure that if you guys need anything else, to feel free to reach out to me. Let me know. You can even just send it to my email with questions, because I've seen a lot of individuals wanting to become RBTs, did their 40 hours, have their assessment done, and now are taking their tests and have had trouble passing. So I want to be helpful and to you guys out there trying to take your test to the best that I can. I joined a couple of different groups on Facebook, but just let me know if there's an area that I can kind of help in, or at least provide some right guidance. Let me know. You can even just reach out to podcast email, abamompodcast@gmail.com, or you can just leave a comment and I'm happy to help you. All right. So take care. Have a good night, and best of luck on your test. Breaking down the entire 3rd edition task list is a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of things to cover, but I think those are the main concepts that to focus on, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. All right, thanks guys. Have a good night. Remember, you are not in this journey alone.